Okay, so this is the independent samples t-test video where I'm going to use R implemented in RStudio to do an independent samples t-test using an example data set. So here is RStudio. And you'll notice this is an R Markdown file. And we're going to do an independent samples t-test to start. In order to be set up, you want to make sure that you have this independent samples t-test data downloaded and that you change your working directory overall to wherever you've saved that file. Okay. And again, you can run chunks of code by just hitting this little arrow in the top right-hand corner of a chunk. So we'll just go ahead and get us everything set up. We need the tidyverse library and the LSR library to make this stuff work. So here's our example question. We have a data set where there are 500 observations, 250 of two groups. One is employees or faculty, one is staff, hypothetically from Davidson College. And we're going to say we've asked these participants to rate how satisfied they are with their job from 1, which is very unsatisfied, to 5, which is very satisfied. And then we just want to see if these two groups differ. So we have two groups and they don't overlap at all. So that means we want to use an independent samples and a t-test because there are two groups. Okay. The code for this is actually quite simple. The first thing that we're going to do right here in line 30 is we're going to read in the data, and I'm just going to hit Control Enter to read that data in, and you'll see over here there's now something in that box called data. And if we were to go ahead and click this, we would see that there is something called score and something called group. Group has 2 levels, faculty and staff, and score is the scores on that hypothetical survey. Okay, so that looks good. There are some assumptions of a t-test. T-tests are pretty robust against these assumptions. So I've stuck some code commented out right here that would allow you to check the assumptions of normality, but really we only need to do this if the sample size is really small. So if you ever need to go back and do this for something, you can, but for today, we're just going to ignore that because it's not often that we actually do that in practice. Okay, so to conduct the test, we're going to use this particular function called independent samples t-test, named well, that's great. And we're going to put a few different things in here. For formula, we're going to say, give me the dependent variable, in this case, score, and then do the little squiggly line like that, relate that to the groups. Very well named here, groups. Okay, so always for formula, we'll put dependent variable, squiggly line, independent variable. We need to tell R what data it is. So we'll put data equals and then the name of the data. I've named this data here, but you could name it anything that you wanted to. And then we have a couple other options where so var equal stands for is the variance equal or not. This is going to always do a Welch's t-test by default. If you have false here, which doesn't care about equal variances, it will adjust your degrees of freedom accordingly. But if you wanted to do a student's t-test, you could put a T here, and then it would do a student's t-test. And we also, it's going to default be a 2-sided test, but if you wanted to make it a 1-sided test, you could certainly do that by saying T here for true. And then you would just want to make sure that you ordered your variables in the direction that you wanted to. And then our confidence level, since we've set our alpha at 0.05, our confidence interval, or confidence level rather, is 0.95. So I'm going to go back up here to line 40. And I'm just going to hit Control Enter. We'll notice that there is a new variable over here now called results. And if we were to open this up, you'll see that there are several different things inside of results that we can then go back and locate with R code. So there's the t-statistic, the degrees of freedom, a p-value, confidence interval, mean, standard deviation, all kinds of things that are useful for reporting things out. And you'll see how I've used those here momentarily. Okay, so let's just first look at the results and interpret them. So we're going to say R, give us results. And this is going to tell us that we have a Welch's independent samples t-test where we've used score as our IV or as our DV and group as our IV. We also have descriptive statistics, mean and standard deviation for each group here. Tells us our null and our alternative hypothesis, which useful for class, but not necessary to report out. And then it gives us our t-test results. So here is our test statistic that we would compare against our critical value, the number of degrees of freedom. Notice that this has a decimal point in it. That's because we've used this Welch's version. And then also this p-value here, which is less than 0.001. If we wanted an exact p-value, we could come over here and look at it. It's in scientific notation and it's essentially 0. If you don't know, R reports out exponential notation as in 5.34, E as in times 10 to the negative 21st power. Okay, so now we can also notice that our P is less than 0.05. So this is a significant result. And then we get our confidence interval as well as a measure of effect size right down here with Cohen's d. Okay, so let's write this up. So what we're going to do here is we are going to use R to give us all of the numbers. So let me show you how this works here. So I'm starting at line 52 here, and we're going to say an independent samples t-test is conducted, and then we're going to use this inline code notation where we have a little dash, the letter R, and then some code here, and then another little dash. And then that code is going to tell R, when we spit this out, spit out the results of this code. So here what I've said is look into results, the variable results. This $sign means access the group names and give me the first value. And if I do that, it will give us faculty or staff. And then I do that again over here, group names, faculty or staff. You can notice that you would know exactly what those were by coming to this side down here. So here's our group names, faculty and staff, and it tells us 1, 2. You could also type it into the console if that was easier to see. We're going to do this over and over again. So here I've said, give me the name of the second group. And there's a significant difference between the groups. And what we want to do is we want to do T in italics. Then we're going to say what are degrees of freedom with rounded to 2 decimal places using that round function. Give us our T statistic here. Our p-value I've written in. Our Cohen's d, same idea. Just tell R what number do I put in there. So later when you go back and use this with your own data, you won't have to change any of these values manually. It'll just show up for you. And then we do the same thing where here, this time, we're going to want to tell what the means and standard deviation were. And so we can do that by using some similar code. So for each one of these, I've asked R, listen, give me the results, look into the results using the $ notation. Which thing am I looking at? Oh, here, in this case where it's highlighted, I'm looking at the mean, and I'm looking at the first value of it. And then remember, round looks like this, where we have the data, comma, how many places, how many decimal places. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a figure. And what we want to do is we are going to do a couple things here. We're going to first put the title of our figure here, and this should be maybe italics instead of bold. Maybe it's supposed to be bold, I don't remember. So we'll just leave it how it was. And then we're going to put a title. And then we have some code down here to create the group. So the reason that the figure one and the title, and then all the way at the bottom, the note are in between, the code is in between this, is because that'll make it look nice for us in our HTML later. So here, in order to create a figure, we need means, we need standard, we need the groups, we need the means, and we need the standard error of the mean for our error bars. And so what I've done here is I've calculated the standard error of the mean for both of these groups. So I've said, okay, I know what the formula for standard error of the mean is. It's the standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size. So I've just done that. I haven't printed it out or anything, just put it in there. And then I've said, look, I'm going to make a plot. I'm going to call this data plot. And I need to put some stuff together so that R knows that I don't just have one thing to plot, but a series of things. Now, in R, what I'm going to have is I'm going to have the groups, I'm going to have the means, and I'm going to have the standard errors of the mean, right? Because that's what a bar plot looks like. Here's a bar plot. Here's some error bars on it. These are our group 1 and then 2 down here. Here's our error bars up here. That's a standard error of the mean, standard error of the mean. And then this value right here and this value right here are the averages of the means. Okay. So we're going to use this in all of these videos going forward. So I'm going to assume you've kind of remember this, but we're going to create a data frame that tells us what all of those values are. So what I've done here is I've said, okay, well, R, remember that this is a data frame. And within this data frame, I want you to say, okay, well, groups are equal to the combination of the two group names. I've done this in code rather than typing it. You could type it there. You could also say group 1, comma, group 2, something like that if you wanted to. But we already have these in here. They're named pretty well. So we're just going to leave it like that. I also need the means. Now I need to match the first and the second value for each one of these because R is going to use it later. So here I'm going to say, okay, well, look, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. So they've got to be in the same order. Okay, but by doing this, I've now told R, well, here's what the groups are, here's what the means are, here's what the standard error of the mean is. And then I'm going to use ggplot, and I'm going to say, well, okay, listen, what I want you to do is use this data frame and plot this whole data frame. So I have 2 bars here. If I wanted 3, I could add some more. You'll see that in a few videos. And on my x-axis, I want group. On my y-axis, I want the mean. This stat identity means do a bar graph. That's the color we'll make it. And then I've added some other options in here to try to make this a little bit more APA friendly. So here's what our error bars are. Basically, you're taking the Y minimum and you're subtracting the mean or adding the mean either way. And then most of this theme area is taking out the colors and things like that. And then just the other thing I would say is down here, you can edit your limits on your particular scale. So if you wanted to make the limits, 1 to 7, you could, if that's how this is written. If you wanted to make it 0 to 500, you could do 0, 500 by tens or something like that. So this is editable as well. So let's run this and see what that looks like. And now we have a relatively APA close graph here. And maybe this 1 to 7 you don't like. Let's put a 4 in here. And we could run the same thing again. And it would be a little bit bigger or whatever. Or I'm sorry, I think this, take this out, maybe to do that. There we go. So depending on where you wanted it, you could sort of change things however you'd like. So let's knit this document. I'll leave it, I'm gonna put it back to how it was. And now we'll hit Control-Shift-K or Command-Shift-K on Mac. And what we'll get is code. You could hide this if you'd like, but then we have our results. We have our written results here. Notice that faculty, staff just show up as faculty and staff. We didn't have to write those in. Our T values and such are formatted correctly, et cetera, et cetera. And now if we go down here, we have a pretty close to APA formatted version. Okay. So this concludes the independent samples t-test. The next video will go into a related samples t-test, which will be quite similar.